to interrupt because I have to move
Uh-huh.
the desk in the study where I'm now sitting. But I
Okay.
guess we can do that because later you can edit that out. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It'll
To
be, yeah,
interrupt.
I'll just keep talking about whatever's on my mind while you're gone.
All right.
Okay, good. So now you're muted and we are now live. So I'm about to introduce you. Okay. Hi, I'm Metta Spencer, and today I get to have a conversation with a very old friend, Frank Cunningham. Frank is a retired professor of philosophy, University of Toronto, and I don't even know when we first met, but it was at least 30 or 40 years ago, wasn't it, Frank?
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that, because we were both faculty members and both hanging around trying to save the world from nuclear war in those days. And Frank was also sort of the executor of the estate of a man named Hans Blumenthal. What's his last name?
Blumenfeld. Hans
Blumenfeld.
Blumenfeld.
Yeah, right. Good. Okay. He was a professor of city planning, I think.
He
And
was in the faculty of architecture, and he was the founder, one of the founders of Canadian city planning.
yeah, but he didn't just do Canada. I remember the interesting thing is he'd been in Russia, and he won a wonderful autobiography, and he talked about having been working on city planning in Russia. And I remember it was at the Soviet Union at the time. And of course, I remember it was about, it was at the time when what do you call this? The Holodar, some of the famine in Ukraine was going on. And Hans was a very pro-Soviet guy. And he claimed he never knew there was anything going on, which I have often wondered, how could he not know? Anyway, here we are, often talking about old times. We're not going to talk about old times much, although if we get to it, that's fine. I want to talk mostly about what you've been writing, because I'm very interested in populism too. And I think we both have concerns about the current status of the world.
Well,
You're frozen. I don't know. Maybe that you're.
Meta, I think we have to interrupt this for a minute. I'm going to have to move my computer to another room because I'm getting a signal that sometimes that happens. So just bear with me.
I will, and
I'll go on. Others.
I'll go on talking while you do this, okay? Because while you're out moving your camera, and there may be people watching and waiting for us to have our brilliant conversation. I want to fill the time. They call it dead air when something is not happening on radio or television that should be happening. So while he's out changing his computer, I will fill the time by telling you about Project Save the World, anybody who's watching. And I don't know whether there's anybody watching or not live, but we'll see. The thing is that Project Save the World is unusual in that it covers, it tries to address at least 6 of the world's most serious global threats. And the reason for doing this is because they are so interdependent causally that I think it's really important and really essential for us to address them as a package. Sometimes you can get more things done when you try to do a whole bunch of things at once than when you try to do them separately one at a time. And in fact, I think some of these issues cannot be solved unless you do them in a comprehensive kind of way, being aware of the fact that these issues are all interdependent. And the issues are war and weapons, which is a logical place for me to start because, like Frank, I've been a peace activist for many, many years. And that's the main network that I have, people who've been working, especially originally against nuclear weapons. but all kinds of issues now involving war and militarism and so on. So that's, here we go. Here comes Frank back again. All right, so. Okay. There we go. All right, how's that?
Right. This ought to keep us connected.
Yeah, you sound much better. I was worrying there for a minute. Okay, so I filled the dead air with information about Project Save the World, which I'm not sure I had shared with you, but if not, you will hear it too.
Good.
Yeah. Okay, so Frank, I know that you retired several years ago and moved to Vancouver, which is the reason I haven't seen much of you for the last few years. But I see that you've been writing and continuing your concerns about political and social issues. So you sent me a paper, which I thought was very, very interesting. And does this keep you awake at night too? I just lie awake thinking, how are we going to fix this, the terrible state that the world has come to with the right wing, the rise of right-wing populist governments?
Well, yes, keeps me awake as well. I think it's a crisis. I believe that along with, of course, the environmental crisis and now COVID, I mean, it's of that magnitude. At the very time that the country and the world, for that matter, really requires progressive, humanistic, competent leadership, right-wing populism is throwing up leaders and policies that are the exact opposite of those things. And it's happening all over the world. So I think that it's actually quite serious.
That's my feeling too.
We're not certainly not free of it here in Canada. When I was still living in Toronto, like you, I experienced the Rob Ford phenomenon. He was a classic right-wing populist. His brother is a little less of a buffoon than Rob, but his policies are populistic and equally detrimental. In Alberta, we've got Kinney, and there's right-wing populist support really across the country.
Okay, you know, about a couple of years ago in a bar, somebody asked me what populism was. And I stammered around looking for a good answer because I'd never thought about it before. And but you made an effort in your paper, which you just sent me, to say what it is. And you had about 3 or 4 criteria. Why don't you bring those out? Let's see whether or not we agree on these are the indicators of populism.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a political movement. It's deeply political, and its rhetoric is what attracts, and that rhetoric has the following characteristics, as far as I can see, common to all populist movements, whatever their other differences. First, it is antagonistic, or as political theorists nowadays say, agonic. That comes from the Greek word for a contest or a joust or something like that.
I often wondered what that meant, and you actually defined it for me.
Yeah, that's what it means. It means it means identifying enemies, and so it's agonic or antagonistic in that sense. So there's always an enemy. You know, we saw it before. It was communism in the old days, and then then Islam and so on, and on a world scale. But now it's such things as the elites, ill-defined, and that brings you to a second characteristic besides being antagonistic or agonic, and that is that it is simplistic. Populism is always simplistic. It's simple solutions to complex problems. You know, in Trump's case, you know, build a wall. In our case, as in his, cut taxes, privatize, just simple solutions, that sort of thing. So those are two of the essential characteristics of populism: its antagonistic nature and its simplisticism. There's others as well, which I discuss in the paper, but those are sort of at the core of it.
Yeah, and you also meant some sort of homogenizing.
Well, that's part of its simplisticism. It's it's the people versus the elites. So there's very little discussion of who the people are or who the elites are. Interestingly enough, there is an elite in just in every place, and that's an economic elite. These are the multi-billionaires and the big corporations, but they don't get targeted by these populist leaders who are right-wing supporters of big capital. I don't understand, to this day, I don't understand why their enthusiastic followers don't twig to this, why they don't understand that, well, yeah, there is an elite here, and it's the people who fire me from my job or pay me inadequate wages, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's part of the simplisticism
that is actually very interesting, because I've also been, I can't remember whom I've been reading recently, who said that, populism ought to be a good word, because there have been populist movements that were left-wing and progressive and so on, that were actually very productive. I don't know. I wouldn't want to put names on these movements, but
well, there was a populist. The most famous ones in North America, of course, are the Wobblies.
That's just what I was about to come up with
in the United States. But we had our own version of that here in Canada. We had the Western. There was an element of populism in the 20s and 30s, even getting into the 40s in Western Canada. Don't forget that
social credit movement. Was that
social credit would have been part of that? Well, social credit in its early days had a left wing as well as a center and a right.
Oh.
That, so it was only later that it bifurcated, was taken over more or less by the right. But the rhetoric of the right wing populists in Alberta, Eberhard being the best known of them, as close as we ever came in Canada having an actual fascist leader. Maybe Duplessis would count as well in Quebec, who also employed rhetoric, populist rhetoric. But he employed populist rhetoric. And if you look at what social credit was promising, it was pretty populistic. Now, they didn't deliver on that. They ended up being a servant of big capital and eventually of the oil industry. But it had a populist appeal in those days. Mm-hmm. There are some people now who think that we should fight fire with fire, and what we need is a left-wing populism. I don't think that that's a good idea. I think that, first of all, you put yourself on the same terrain as the right-wing populists. And in a contest between the right and the left populists in today's world, the right-wing populists will win. They're simply stronger. So it's a losing battle. There's something deeper than that, too. And that is that what if you did fight fire with fire and generate a left-wing populist movement? If it's going to be populistic, it's going to have the same sort of appeal. It's got to be simplistic and antagonistic, homogenizing, all those kinds of things. Well, the world is too complex for that. The country is too complex for that kind of politics. Mm-hmm. And it also can breed demagoguery. And more than once, we have seen left-wing populist movements turn into, as in some places in South America, turn into Peronism being the best example, turn into right-wing governments. So I'm not a fan of let's have a left-wing populist movement. I think there are ways to combat populism, but right-wing populism, but I don't think that's one of them.
Well, I wonder whether all of the populist movements in the world today really share all of the same qualities. I haven't really investigated what their ideologies or their programs or platforms are, but certainly you're right in saying that the people who support Trump don't mind having a billionaire be their guy. You would think they would want, somebody who represented the interests of poor people, but no. They are very much okay with people getting enormous and inordinate amounts of wealth and power. But is that true for all of the current movements around? I mean, I don't know what Modi stands for exactly, except Hinduism, a weird kind of Hinduism, or what Bolsonaro stands for, or the various groups. Well, I kind of know what Johnson stands for, except I wouldn't want to have to explain it. Do they really have enough in common to call them similar or identical, or are there variants, do you think, within?
Well, of course there are variants, but they aren't. The major variant that I see is that some of the populist movements also appeal to religion, and others do not. It's not that they don't dare be anti-religious, but they don't play to religion in the way it's as in India, for example, or the Hinduism is kind of sutured with Hinduism, or in Israel, Netanyahu has a lot of populist characteristics in his government. And although he was started off pretty much as a secularist, now he, of course, is catering to right-wing religious sentiment in his country. So that's different. I don't see that particularly in Alberta or in Ontario.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, now, to me, the interesting thing as a used to be political sociologist is trying to explain the sources of this attitude. What is the explanation for it? And I have a real problem understanding it. I do think I take exception to probably the most common explanation that people trot out, and I shouldn't be pejorative. The main thing that people want to give is an economic explanation. They talk, for example, about how Trump's support came from the Rust Belt and unemployment and workers whose jobs had been sent overseas and who are therefore down and out, sort of, compared to the rest of the economy, and that this was a source of his support. Well, I don't believe that, and I did 6 months or so ago take a good look at the exit polls of people coming out of the November elections, and there was very little correlation between education or income. It didn't seem to make any difference until you get up to the $100,000 a year level. And at that point, there was a slight, or maybe 10 percentage points difference in which the well-paid people were pro-Biden, and the rest of them more in favor of Trump. So it didn't vary by income level. It also didn't vary by education level. That's what I couldn't understand. Amazingly, everybody says it's uneducated people. Well, it didn't seem to make any difference, even up to, except when you get to people with a professional or postgraduate degree. People with a BA, same level of support for Trump as people with grade 5 education. Didn't make any difference.
Oh. Well,
and here's where it did break, because when you see a little bit of tendency that when you get to people who could be called elites, that is urban professionals doing work in IT or other, sophisticated jobs with professional degrees. Okay, they're 10 percentage points different or so, and that much less likely to support Trump. But it really isn't so much an economic issue as anybody was claiming. And it, I think, is much more, one of the things that did matter in those polls showed rural-urban differences mattered, that rural people were much more likely to support Trump, and whites, of course. The difference between blacks and whites was enormous. So it's, it's race, or it's ethnicity, it's identity politics, I think, and not economic. What do you
sorry.
think?
Well, I think that economics does play a big role in this, and in a way, so does education. But the way that it's indirect. In terms of the economy, so one of the precipitating features of populism, one of the things that it feeds upon is anxiety, and when in the current economies that we have around the world, and certainly in Canada, people from all except the very wealthiest are anxious, and often for economic reasons. Even if you're making $100,000 a year, that might well be because you've got a well-paying job, but those jobs are starting to be threatened. And if you live in Oshawa or Hamilton or some or Thunder Bay or one of these places, or Sudbury, where the rug is being pulled out from whole industries, affecting not just the blue collar workers, but the white collar workers in those places as well. That generates anxiety and fear for the future, for one's future economic and the future of one's family. So I think that does play a role, and it plays a role sort of across the board. It's only when you get up into the billionaire class and or the super millionaires and the corporate sector that people are cushioned against this, and the populists, all of them, despite their rhetoric, occasional anti-corporate rhetoric, all play to these folk. With respect to education, it's not education per se that I think, or the lack of it, that is the problem. I think that what marks a populist, one of the preconditions for populist success, is a dearth of critical thinking skills. The ability of people to think critically about why they're in the situation that they are, to think critically about politics, or to question the simplistic rhetoric of the populist leaders. And universities ought to be better places for teaching critical thinking skills than I think they are. It does not surprise me that people who have at least undergraduate degrees, and sometimes graduate degrees, can still be bewitched by and not see through populist promises and theories. And that's because we are not doing a very good job in the universities of teaching critical thinking skills. The universities, as you know better than most, Meta, are becoming more and more fragmented into disciplines that don't communicate with one another, and are looking for technocratic solutions and problems more than looking at society-wide issues. Of course, in philosophy, we teach critical thinking, but even there, we tend to ghettoize it. We have a lot of universities have courses and whole departments devoted to teaching critical thinking. That's the wrong way to do it. critical thinking needs to be integrated with every single discipline, the sciences, the social sciences, the humanities. That isn't being done. So I do think that there is that problem. Now, when you say about when you talk about the rural city divide, yes, that quite clearly is a precipitating, that is a difference. And rural areas tend to be under economic threat, a lot more economic anxiety about the future, and they tend to be more traditionalist, depending upon family traditions and on religion, than on people, relying on their own thinking abilities to solve problems. And then finally, let me make one last point, and that is another precipitation is that every single populist movement that I know of plays to prejudices and bigotry. Whether it's homophobia or sexism, or in particular, especially in the United States today, but also elsewhere, and alas, even here, racism. It's not a surprise, should be a surprise to no one that Black people in the United States tend not to support Trump. He's a racist.
Yeah, of course.
And he supports racist policies.
Yeah. Well, what I was also interested in with these exit polls.
So I think all these factors that you mentioned are still at.
Sorry, say it again. You're frozen. We got a connectivity problem here. Yoo-hoo. Uh-oh. I hope I haven't lost you completely. Oh, phooey. Okay.
There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
See if
right.
that's better.
Yeah, I lost your train of thought there someplace. I don't know where you were when you were saying.
Was it racism or was it the rural-urban divide?
I'm not sure, but we're past the issue of critical thinking, I think. Okay. Sure, it's racism. And one of the things I noticed was that the real correlates of support for Trump were mostly cultural, the culture wars. It would be things like guns, the right to bear arms, or a gay marriage, or letting transsexual people use the toilets of the other sex, or abortion, or that kind of cultural difference, more than anything having to do with their economic status or even their educational level.
Yeah, that's something to that for sure. But you see, all that rhetoric and those politics, against gay rights and women's rights and, against controlling the police and all the rest of it, they are preying on pre-existing prejudices, racism, sexism, homophobia. Those, alas, are alive and well all over the place, in Canada as well as in other countries. But what is different now, what differentiates the right-wing populist political leaders is that they quite explicitly draw upon these prejudices. They not just draw upon, they draw upon them and they exacerbate them. So yeah, for sure, that's what's taking place. My point, though, is that that's one of several factors, and I think the economic factor is still there in the way that I earlier described. There's not like a simple correlation. Attack salaries in the Rust Belt in the United States, and then you will get populists. It's not as simple as that. It's a more diffuse and generalized attack on people's living standards and job securities. And that's happening, and that happens for everybody except the very rich. And so you get that, and then it goes from there to a general feeling of fear and anxiety, a looking for scapegoats, and then bigotry and racism plays into that. You see, that it's a package. It's a complex intertwining of all these factors.
Right. Okay. But I mean, I would say, yes, it has to do with the sense of being vulnerable or under threat or losing vulnerable, let's put it, economically vulnerable. But it's not the reality of being economically vulnerable, because the most interesting recent piece of research I've seen was a report by a guy named, I think, Robert Pape at the University of Chicago, who has been studying the guys who, 600 or 800 of them already they've found, who attacked the Capitol, the insurrectionists.
Yeah.
Who actually broke in and who've been arrested. So they have information about these people now. And it turns out they are not young hoodlums at all. They are mostly in their 40s, and they are well established. They're married, they have families, they have businesses. They could be, the owner of the local car dealership or that kind of level. Even people in the Department of Foreign Affairs, international, the State Department, one or two of those. People who should, by all means, know better. But when he questioned them about what their motives were, the one thing that stood out very, very strongly was what he called the theory of, oh Lord, what's the language he used for it? Not overturning, but the idea that the white middle-class dominant successful businessman type stable people are they're being overtaken by other groups that are minorities that are gaining rights that are faster than they are. So they feel threatened by, then they're going to feel that the dominant white group in American society will be replaced by these immigrants or Muslims or gays or whoever is on their mind, people who they think will challenge their status. It isn't that they're really in danger economically, it's that they see other groups as gaining on them and maybe overtaking them. And that seems to be the most important explanation of the whole phenomenon. So I think it's not really social class. It's more like a Weberian explanation. It's social status, which is comparative, not real. Social class, you can put dollar signs on it and figure out who belongs in what class by what their income level or whatever. But that's not what this is. This is people who feel that there are other groups that are going to overtake and replace them as leaders in society. And that is a comparative measure. You look at the other people and not judge yourself in terms of objective things. Do you have enough? Are you making enough money? But rather, who's gaining on me? I find that really very problematic.
Well, listen, I don't want to be pushed into an economic reductionist position by you, Meta, which I think you're trying to do.
Okay.
But that there is an economic dimension to all of this seems to me incontrovertible, and it applies especially perfectly to the findings that you're describing. That is, let's take racism as the best example, and all that we're seeing happening in the United States in this dramatically, and also in Canada. And that is that people do feel, a lot of people, that heretofore white men in North America had a leg up in competition for things like jobs and income over other people in the population. They didn't have to defend themselves. Women were always going to be underpaid and less often or highly promoted as men. Blacks were going to be even in a worse situation. But now, for lots of different reasons, suddenly they are the women first, and now visible minorities are beginning to challenge that privilege, white male privilege is under threat. It's being challenged, and they're reacting against this. And one can understand that reaction. It does have to do with, in part, not entirely, it's partly has to do with status and self-image and all the rest of it. I'm important, because of who I am and what my gender and race is. It has to do partly with that, but it also has to do with their, not just their social, but their economic status and standing, which is now under threat. They have to compete for jobs with people that before they never had to compete with. So, I mean, that's the sense of the economic impetus that I see at work in populism. And the populists play to that successfully.
Right. Well, there's another interesting fact that he discovered, this Pape guy.
Yeah.
Which I don't know what to make of it, because it doesn't fit any explanation I've ever heard discussed exactly. He says it's not just red people. I mean, people from Republicans, right-wing people. It's people, Republicans in blue districts. It's Republicans who are in a district or area, would be in Canada riding, that would be predominantly progressive. So I kind of, and it's very interesting why it's what that means. I think it has to mean that these people are comparing themselves to their neighbors or the people that they know and finding themselves outnumbered by people whose values are antithetical to their own. And they feel therefore very beleaguered and threatened and hostile about it. But isn't that an interesting finding? I mean, I don't know of any other research that's looked at that kind of phenomenon.
Yeah, well, you should have on your show a social scientist, fellow social scientist.
I will try to get Robert Pape himself. I can.
You should do that. I'm not that. I'm a philosopher. What do I know from facts? So, but look, I think that people in the Rust belts, so to speak, and analogously, previously working class towns and regions in Canada, I think that what they're comparing themselves to is the life of their parents more than to, and their grandparents, rather than to contemporary people who are ethnically different than them, although they certainly do compare themselves to those for the reasons I said. They're now competitors, before they weren't. And in the life of their parents and grandparents, look, Hamilton, my wife's from Hamilton, and I spend quite a bit of time in Hamilton. Hamilton traditionally had been a working class town, and it had been, it was a union town. Everyone supported the union. Everyone supported, you almost always voted NDP. You would get some of my people in my in-laws have values that I don't share on other social issues, but on that, the older ones were, united. Well, all that's disappearing. Stelco moves on to Mexico.
By the way, where did they go? Did they collapse?
Stelco? Largely, they collapsed, Stelco, and it collapsed because of bad management. They were producing. They had only one kind of steel that they were making. It was the cheapest steel to make, and it's only useful for some kinds of buildings. And when the demand for that steel dropped, then Stelco suddenly didn't have a market. They hadn't diversified, unlike Falconbridge and some of the others that did diversify, and so they weathered the storm more or less. But then some of it also, some of their production did go overseas. So at any rate, and that the same story can be told in Oshawa, it can be told in Sudbury, it can be told in lots of, and all through the Dust Belt. Beginning with the Reagan and in our case the Mulrooney days, there were these attacks on the working class and on the union movement. Social democracy got largely eviscerated. The liberals, when they got into power, and that still is the case, or the Democrats in the United States, ended up pretty well carrying on the policies of the conservative Republicans. Mm-hmm. The Clintonites are a very, very good example of that. I think it's unfortunately more or less true also of the Trudeau liberals. Not as bad, not as extreme. There are exceptions, but nonetheless, if I'm now a blue collar worker, or even what's the difference between blue and white? Is there something like beige there? Is it, but if I'm in that middle management and so on, I'm saying, well, things used to be good, but now they're bad. And you know what? They're right. Things used to be more or less good, and now they are more or less bad. And so then they start looking, and then who is making what few gains there are, who are getting the few jobs that are available? Well, they're ones who are, they're women, because they're getting rid of the prohibitions on women and visible minorities, like Asians who are coming to Canada and doing more or less economically well, or at least now are becoming genuine threats. I could see it teaching. When I started teaching, there were very few Asian students and almost no Black students. And I also taught in the engineering faculty, where there also were almost no women. And what few there were got on well with the white men, who were white boys, who were their fellow students. But then they started to do better. Women started to more and more of them got into the professional schools and got out of the ghettos, nursing and education, and into the professions and so on. The Asians, who were highly motivated, mainly by their families, to really work hard, began excelling. And then you started to get resentment and expressions of sexism and racism amongst white male students that I hadn't seen before. So that was, it wasn't as violent as in the US, but I could see it. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about.
Well, there's certainly recently been an attention, at least in the US, I don't know whether it's happening in Canada, that, there's suddenly a concern about protecting the human rights of Asians who are being racially stigmatized and attacked and abused, which I guess it came to the fore when there was a murder of some, I guess, Vietnamese women in Georgia, was it?
Oh, no, yeah, but it's also here too in Canada, and it's extreme.
Well, that's what I've been hearing but I don't know how new this is, and whether or not this is an emerging phenomenon or not, and whether it is part of the whole anti-elitism thing. Now, of course, when it comes to Vietnamese spa workers, and I guess they were really sex workers, and that's the interesting part, is that's kind of played down in the press, that this was, you could attribute it, I think, not just to resentment of Asians, but resentment of prostitutes. But I shouldn't go there without knowing anything about it. That's just not talked about. Mm-hmm. But I believe those spas were not just fingernail spas where you get your fingernails done, but something more. Anyway, whether or not, you can't call those women elites, but you could say that the remarkable industriousness of Chinese immigrants to Canada and their success, I guess other Asian populations, Indians, for example, that they could be seen as people to fear as up and coming elites, overturning the privileges of the previously dominant group. I don't know. Would you link that anti-Asian phenomenon to anti-elitism, or is that something entirely?
Well, it's not elitism exactly. Again, I don't. You frame things in sociological terms, unlike me. Not that I think that's the wrong way to do it. It's just a different way of thinking.
Right.
But it's that Asians are now entering the workforce in a way that they weren't before, and are able to compete in a way that they weren't before with white workers, and that's causing anxiety on the part of the white workers. Now there is a privilege that they had that's been taken away from them. White students, for instance, in the face of the competition, the academic competition from the Asian students, Korean and Vietnamese and Chinese, and so on. The reaction ought to be to pull up their socks and start studying harder, just like their Asian fellow students, and maybe eventually that's what will happen. There's a cycle there. We saw it once with Jewish students. When, especially during and after World War II, you started to getting an influx of Jews into North America. They didn't come and directly go into the boardrooms of the corporations. They came and they had terrible paying jobs, and but they put high emphasis on education, and they were really obliging their kids to work hard, and they did, and you got pushback and you got resentment and so on. And I think one of the triumphs really in Canada had, although it's not perfect, but still I think it's a mini triumph, is that the anti-Semitism that people did, they accommodated. This was the non-Jews accommodated to this and began to relate in a positive way to their Jewish fellow students and their compatriots. And so a lot of Jews did make it into the boardrooms of the nation, and that was a good thing. Yeah. So, but it's interesting to me that anti-Semitism has come back again. These right-wing groups are now they're not just anti-Asian and anti-Black. They now also are attacking synagogues. And
Trump was definitely Trump is not anti-Semitic. That's the interesting thing.
What is it? Sorry,
Trump was certainly not anti-Semitic. He's his daughter is an Orthodox Jew married to a guy who's very hands-on, active in.
No, of course not. Of course, yeah, but see, he opened the Pandora's box by playing to race, which he did. Mm-hmm. By playing to race, this thing against immigrants and by supporting systemic measures that led to that reinforced systemic anti-Black racism in the United States. He opened up a Pandora's box, and his famous base, these people who are follow him, eagerly seized on that, and the members of that base don't have sons-in-laws that are Jewish, or daughters-in-law. That's all manner of racisms are fair game for them. So I mean but
they certainly don't differentiate various factors that should be antithetical.
Yeah, right. Of course not. Well, that again, the absence of critical thinking skills are lacking.
In fact, that's the thing that bothers me. I mean, it isn't that I think certain categories of people are in special danger. It's that I see the results of an election in which Trump almost won again. Mm-hmm. And when half of the American population support people whose overt expression of their ideas are so contemptible and so illegal and so contrary to all the uh, presumed moral standards that we presumably share. I think there's something, excuse me, this is an indication of extreme pathology of the whole damn culture. You know, I mean, well, you do not.
Hard to disagree with you there.
A society that is so messed up that they would support something that, if you ask them what their values are, they would give you all the right values. They'd tell you what they believe in, and they would be decent moral standards. But when it comes to reality, they will support somebody who is absolutely antithetical to those values. That indicates to me more than lack of critical thinking. It indicates to me that there's something really sick about a culture if a whole population gets that screwed up. And it makes me worry about the future and the prospects and the viability of democracy itself. Because this was a democracy. It wasn't because we have a problem with the fact that lots of democratic states, including the US and maybe including Canada, I don't see it here, are losing ground in terms of representativeness and so on. You have things like new restrictive voting laws now being enacted in various states just this week, and so on. Things that are cutting down on the representativeness of the government and so on. So that's bad enough. But the problem is, even when you have a really basically good democracy functioning, and the people they elect are people like Trump, or not just Trump, in other countries, the same thing. If you go back to Hitler, Hitler was brought to power by a democratic government, democratic procedures. It makes me think, I can't see how we can have a continuation of the kind of government that we have, democracy, without making some kind of change that I don't know what to propose exactly. But I'm worried. I don't even, it makes me think, well, democracy is broken. It's not working anymore. And maybe it's not working because life is just so damn complicated that people don't know enough to figure out whether global warming is real or not. They aren't scientifically trained enough to actually evaluate the material. People don't know enough to figure out whether or not a particular vaccine is a good one or a bad one, or whether a virus originated in China or in the pangolin animal in the wilderness. They don't know. They can't figure out what kind of economic policies would be good. It's too complicated. It's hard, and you can't just teach people critical thinking and expect that's going to do it, because even I don't have enough time to figure out all of these, the answers to some of these problems.
Well, again, Meta, I mean, in my view, challenged critical thinking skills are just a piece of the puzzle. It's not the explanation. So right. It's just part of it. And I do think that democracy looks to be breaking in various places. But the reason that I think it's breaking is that it was imminently breakable, that it was a sitting duck for being broken. And that's true even in the so-called strong democracies like the United States or like Canada. If you take the simplest possible characterization of democracy is that it's majority rule. We have nothing approximating majority rule, nor have we ever had it in Canada or the United States. Proportional representation is simply off the map. And anytime that people try to introduce it, it gets beaten down. The gerrymandering, it's especially true in the United States, where the gerrymandering and all of that works. That a handful of right-wing mainly southern states are able to control their legislatures, again, with or without majority support, and are able thereby to affect the whole court system and the electoral system in the whole of the United States, is evidence against majority rule. And we don't have it here either. The urban districts are underrepresented relative to rural districts. We don't have proportional representation. We have a political party system, which really means that which works against participatory democracy. It's hard to break into that. The parties have a lock on it. So I mean, democracy isn't that strong. If it were, populism, I don't think, would stand a chance. All the opinions I've shown have been in the United States right now is that the Biden plan, which is a pretty good plan, it's the New Deal. It's like he wants to revive the New Deal, Roosevelt's New Deal. That the Biden plan has much stronger support amongst the population as a whole than it does in Congress, even including in the Democratic wing of the Congress. And that's true also in Canada, where progressive measures have a lot of popular support, but there's really no mechanism for translating that support into public policy. So I think that the democracy, weak democracy, is yet another precondition or a facilitator, as I like to put it, of right-wing populism.
Well,
that was certainly true in Germany. It's certainly true in the case of Hitler, and that the Weimar Republic that he overturned was one that was not a bad democracy on paper, but in actual practice, it was subject to a lot of the same stresses that democracy in the United States and Canada are in today.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to disagree with you, because the last show that I did was one about proportional representation.
Oh, really?
Two people from Vancouver, from the Fair Vote outfit in Vancouver, and one guy in Ottawa, who's the head of the Fair Vote Canada thing, giving all the reasons why we should have proportional representation.
Yeah, well, they're right.
And I didn't disagree a bit. I thought this was exactly right. However, we didn't go into the question you just broached, which is, and I don't know the answer to it. It obviously, we've been saying that populism is found in many other countries. I've never tried to make a list of which countries are really run by populist regimes now and which ones are not. But if we did, and then we looked at which ones of those are PR systems and which ones of them are first past the post systems, I don't know whether you'd find that how much difference that makes, or if any. I mean, certainly Modi is as close to being a populist, analog in India as they get, and he certainly is more than a populist. Some people would call him a near fascist, but and of course it's not a first past the post system. It's multiple party system, is it not? Yeah.
Well, too many parties, actually.
I don't know what's the story in Brazil. I mean, Bolsonaro.
I can't tell you. That's not my.
Well, it's an interesting question, though, whether or not you can attribute much of it to that. But yeah, I would agree that the problem that we've got all kinds of structural problems with the way constitutions are organized, and we need to make a lot of improvement about it. But I have to say, I think there's something deeper going on that it has to do with the culture, the pathological attitudes that I think, and then how do you change a culture?
Well, the deep antagonisms are, I mean, the friend enemy part of the culture, I think, is close to the heart of all of the cultural dimension of populism. It's identifying an enemy, blaming an enemy. It's an easy thing to do, and it plugs into psychotic tendencies that exist in all too many people.
Why would they be so anti-elitism as to oppose science when their life depends on getting masks on, for example? Why would there be a politicization of the use of face masks to keep yourself safe from viruses? That's crazy. You know, that's just bizarre. Why would people deny global warming when they look out the window and the forest fire is encroaching on their house, and they'd still say global warming isn't happening, etc.? This is worse than lack of critical thinking. This is some kind of pathological thinking, isn't it?
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I think that the right-wing populists, especially in North America and especially in the United States, have succeeded in doing is suturing their policies with neoliberalism. I don't think that there is a necessary or essential connection between neoliberal economic policies and political policies on the one hand, and these kind of populist assaults and their bigotries and racism and so on the other. But often they can come together, and it certainly did come together. It does come together in the case of the Fords and the Kennys and the Trumps. And at the heart of neoliberalism is not just distrust, but hatred of the state. It's the idea that the state is the enemy of the people. That's why they want to dismantle states. That's why they don't want state regulations or public enterprises and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And when you listen to the people who are refusing to wear masks, very quickly, it turns into their slogans turn into "no one's going to tell me what to do," meaning the state is not going to govern the city government or the provincial government or the state governments. They're not going to tell. The state is not going to tell me what to do. I am free to decide what I want. And who is telling us that we have to wear these masks? The state is telling us. Who are these doctors who are telling us? They are state doctors. So it's that contempt for and fear of and hatred of the state itself, which is a core neoliberal doctrine that I think is at play here.
Well, now I don't know what we're going to do about it. It's going to take more than teaching critical thinking in the universities. And I really don't, I don't know. But one of the things that the last conversation I had about proportional representation, those folks were into promoting the idea of citizens' assemblies. Mm-hmm. that you want to reintroduce deliberative democracy, not just voting according to your tribal affiliation, but trying to bring real thinking about scientific evidence and that sort of thing into the political decision making, where it's not relevant today on the same level. And so they like the idea of having a representative sample of citizens be recruited and given a year or two with all of the expert input that they can bring in to give them information and so on, so that by the time they're through, their judgment and their recommendation would be better informed than that of the typical voter.
Well, I agree with that. You'd have a much stronger democracy if you had a deliberative democracy. And or another wing of that is a more participatory democracy, such as associative democracy, where you delegate decision making as deeply as you can down to citizen groups. All those things would strengthen democracy, and I think that this, contrary to those who think that democracy is a cause of right-wing populism, because after all, Trump was elected. I believe that weak democracy is one of the facilitators of right-wing populism, and that what you need to do is strengthen democracy, not weaken it.
Well, I do too, but I don't know how to fix it.
Well, number one question, Meta.
That's true. I think we've come to the end of our conversation in terms of time,
Okay,
and I'll be editing out large chunks.
no doubt.
But
Nice talking with you.
it's
Mhm.
been lots of fun talking to you again, Frank. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Nice talking to you.
Yeah.
Congratulations on this series that you have going.
All right. I'll send you the link, and I hope all is well.
Please do.
Okay.
Equally. Okay, take care.